The sun had already begun its slow climb above the tree line, casting a soft golden light across our little cul-de-sac. My wife, Diane, had just returned from her morning walk with our shepherd mix, Buddy, at 58. She walked with a quiet confidence, the sort of confidence that came from years of service most people in our neighborhood couldn't begin to guess at. She still kept her hair tied neatly in a ponytail, still wore her old boots, and that morning she had on her jacket pulled snug against the cool air. Strapped to her hip, visible only because the wind pushed her jacket back, was a pistol she was licensed to carry. To her, it wasn't a statement. It wasn't a show. It was simply a tool, part of who she had been and still was. We had moved into that HOA-run neighborhood just 2 years earlier. It was meant to be peaceful, a retirement spot of sorts, though neither of us were fully retired yet. But like many communities, there was one person who seemed to take it upon herself to make the rules bend to her own satisfaction. Her name was Marlene, though most people called her Karen behind her back, and sometimes even to her face when tempers ran high. She wore that title like it was beneath her, though she lived up to every bit of it. If she wasn't nitpicking about someone's mailbox being the wrong shade of brown, she was marching around with a clipboard, inventing violations like a general going to war. That morning, I was sitting on the porch, sipping my coffee and enjoying the quiet, when I noticed Marlene standing across the street near her roses, frozen like she'd seen a ghost. Her eyes were glued to Diane's hip. Even from where I sat, I knew exactly what was about to happen. I tried to wave her down, tried to mouth, "Don't do it," but she spun on her heel and marched inside, her phone already pressed at her ear. Within minutes, I heard it, the distant wail of sirens. My heart sank, not in fear for my wife, but in dread of the unnecessary chaos this was about to stir up. Diane had just unclipped Buddy from his leash and was kneeling down to rub his ears when the squad car rounded the corner and screeched to a stop. Out spilled 2 officers, hands hovering near their holsters, voices raised in that sharp tone that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. "Ma'am, step away from the dog. Hand where we can see them." I saw Diane turn her head slowly, not startled, not frightened, just disappointed. She stood with the kind of calm that comes from years of facing far worse. She raised her hands halfway, enough to show she wasn't reaching for anything, and looked at them with a patience that almost bordered on pity. "What's this about, officers?" she asked, her voice steady as stone. The officers exchanged glances, clearly thrown off by how composed she was. One of them stepped forward, voice cracking a little less confidently. "We got a call about an armed woman threatening the neighborhood." That's when Marlene appeared from behind her curtain, peeking like a child who had just tattled and couldn't wait to watch the punishment. She looked smug, sure that this was her shining moment. Diane sighed, then did something I'll never forget. She slowly reached into her jacket, not for the gun, but for her wallet. The officer stiffened, but she moved deliberately, smoothly, like she had rehearsed this 1,000 times. Out came a worn leather badge case. She flipped it open, holding it steady so the morning light caught the emblem. The silence that followed could have swallowed the whole street. The 2 officers froze, eyes locked on that badge. I watched as attention drained from their shoulders, replaced with something else, recognition, respect. They stepped back almost in unison, like soldiers realigning their stance. Then one of them did what I'll remember until my last day. He gave a sharp salute. "Detective Sergeant Mitchell." Diane introduced herself, her tone polite but edged with authority. Retired, but last I checked, the Constitution still held. "I'm licensed to carry. Care to explain why you came at me like I was robbing a bank?" The younger of the 2 officers swallowed hard. We got a call. Said you were brandishing." Marlene came hurrying across the lawn at that moment, her lips already moving faster than her feet. "See, I told you, she's dangerous. Walking around with a gun like some vigilante, scaring everyone. You should arrest her." Diane didn't even look at her. She kept her eyes on the officers, her expression saying more than words ever could. Finally, she closed her badge case, slipped it back into her pocket, and crouched again to scratch Buddy's head. "You boys did your job," she said simply. "But maybe next time, consider who's calling you before you come rushing in." The older officer gave a small nod. "Yes, ma'am." He turned, his gaze settling briefly on Marlene, whose face had gone redder than her roses. Then he said very carefully, "We'll be filing a report on this call. False claims are a serious matter." You could see Marlene deflate, like a balloon losing air. She opened her mouth, closed it, then stomped back toward her porch, muttering something about neighborhood safety. The squad car rolled away not long after, leaving the street even quieter than before. Diane finally stood, brushed off her jeans, and came to sit next to me on the porch. She took my coffee cup, sipped it, and shook her head. "You'd think people would have learned by now," she murmured. I chuckled softly. "Marlene doesn't learn. She only escalates." Diane leaned back in her chair, her eyes on the horizon where the sun had fully risen. There was a weight in her posture, the kind she carried not because of Marlene, but because of all the years that had come before. She had worn that badge through things our neighbors would never understand, through nights of chasing suspects down alleys, through standing between victims and the worst humanity could throw at them. Now here she was, being treated like a criminal in her own neighborhood because someone couldn't mind their own business. But there was no anger in her, only a kind of quiet resolve. That was one of the many things I admired about her. She had seen enough in her life to know that anger only fed the wrong fire. Later that week, the HOA board called a special meeting, no doubt stirred up by Marlene's theatrics. We attended, mostly out of curiosity. As expected, Marlene launched into a tirade about weapons in the community and endangering children. She waved her arms like she was swatting flies, painting Diane as some outlaw stomping through town with a six-shooter. When she finally paused to breathe, Diane stood. She didn't raise her voice, didn't even move from where she was. She simply told them who she was, what she had done, what the law allowed her to do. She reminded them of the difference between fear and fact, between perception and reality. And then she said something that silenced the whole room. Safety isn't about pretending danger doesn't exist. It's about being prepared for it. I spent 30 years making sure families slept safe in their beds at night. I won't apologize for continuing to carry the tools that allowed me to do that, but I also won't use them unless there is no other choice. If that makes you afraid, maybe what you're really afraid of is the world itself. The room was quiet after that, except for a few scattered nods. Even some of the board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, as if realizing they had been pulled into a fight they didn't want. Marlene, of course, couldn't let it go. She sputtered about rules and decorum, but the wind had gone out of her sails. The board closed the meeting without taking any action, which in HOA language was as close to a victory as you could get. That night, Diane and I sat on the porch again, Buddy at our feet, the crickets chirping in the grass. I asked her how she managed to stay so calm, even when accused, even when the police had pulled up like that. She smiled faintly, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Because I've been on the other side," she said. "I've been the one called to a scene, not knowing what I was walking into. Fear makes people jump to conclusions. But if you let that fear control you, you stop thinking clearly. I won't let someone else's fear own me." I thought about that for a long while. Maybe that was a lesson Marlene never learned, that controlling people out of fear wasn't the same as keeping them safe. That real safety came from courage, from composure, from understanding that life will never be without risk. Over the month that followed, Marlene grew quieter around us. Not friendlier, never that, but quieter. The other neighbors began to see her for what she was, a woman ruled by fear, trying to spread it like a disease. And they began to look at Diane differently, too. Some stopped by to ask about her years on the force. Others asked for advice on home safety, or just thanked her for what she had done in her career. Life settled again, as life always does. The memory of that day faded into the background, though not completely. Every now and then, when the sun was rising and Diane clipped Buddy's leash on, I'd think about those flashing lights, about the salute, about the look on Marlene's face when her false call had backfired. And I realized something then, something worth holding on to. Respect is not something you demand with clipboard or a title. It's something you earn day by day with actions and with the quiet strength of a life lived in service. Diane had earned hers long before we moved here, and no amount of pettiness from the likes of Marlene could take that away. What she carried wasn't just a gun. It wasn't even just a badge. It was a lifetime of responsibility, of sacrifice, of courage. And that, more than anything, was what made those officers pause, what made them salute. Not the metal emblem, but the woman who had carried it with honor. And for me, sitting there on that porch with her hand in mine, that was all the proof I'd ever need that true authority isn't about power at all. It's about the steadiness of character when the world decides to test you.